Hi, Angie.
Hi, Reka. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good too. Yes.
Good. And hi, our lovely listeners. Welcome to our podcast, Perfectly
Yes.
Human, the podcast that helps you feel that we are all connected and whatever you are experiencing is perfectly human. I'm one of your hosts, Rekha.
And I am Angie. And I wanted to say, by the way, because Reka and I were speaking about how some of you are already sending us very lovely comments.
Yeah.
So we are very happy about your feedback. We are happy that you're liking the podcast and keep them coming.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Because it's a bit weird, isn't it? You don't get feedback like, are people actually listening? And it's like, and it's so nice to actually hear people are listening. I was a bit like,
Yes.
what, really?
Yes.
So
Absolutely.
yeah, and this week, well, not this week, this month, sorry, was International Women's Day. So we thought that it would be good to focus on women. So today's podcast is called "What Is Holding Women Back." Because we've been pondering the role of women, equality, gender balance, and equity. I think a conversation that has been going on for a long time. And
Mm.
so that's what today's podcast is going to be about.
Yes. And we wanted to start with obviously acknowledging that a lot of work has been done, obviously, in the probably sort of 100 years, really.
Yeah. And
There has been
continues
a
to be
lot
done. Yeah.
and continues to be done. But obviously, the first highlight for us was there is still inequality.
Yeah.
And this year, the theme for International Women's Day was actually about equity as well and inequity. So there's still both inequality and inequity
Yeah.
in the world. So we were looking at, without wanting to bombard people with too much data and stuff, we wanted to sort of look just a couple of things. So the
But
first
Angie,
one,
before we do that, sorry,
yes,
I was just thinking some listeners may not know the difference between equity and
yes,
equality. So I think
go
it
on.
might, can you just kind of explain that
Yes.
briefly?
So equality is where we are all given the same opportunities, let's say. So imagine that obviously in many countries around the world, actually education is accessible to both boys, girls, people with disabilities, without disabilities. But inequity means that sometimes still not the case that everybody goes to a school that can really help for their particular circumstances. So, for instance, again, we are advancing a lot more in terms of things like disabilities, but still, in many places, you may not have a school that can actually take a disabled child.
Right.
So, equity is more about providing opportunities to people, like to provide a shoe that fits to the person, not just any shoe, if that
Yeah.
makes sense,
Yeah.
because we're
Yeah.
also starting, all of us are starting from different places in life. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. No, I understand that. So I guess it's just taking into account like women when they're leaving work because they're having a child. How is that being accommodated for example? Thank you, Angie.
Yes, yes, yes. So looking at just a couple of stats here. So the first one, because we were looking and wondering, okay, what's the situation right now? For instance, in things like, let's get an indicator, politics, right? So as of January 2023, so this year, there are 31 countries where 34 women serve as either head of state and or government. Okay, so 31 countries out of 195 countries in the world, that is actually 16% of the world countries. So yes, what would you say about that, Reka?
Well, it was interesting because when you initially said 31 countries and then 34, I thought, oh, okay, that's not bad. But then when you said it's like 16%, I was like, oh, okay.
Yes,
And I
let's put
think,
things.
yeah, and I think that it's okay, it's progress. But I have to say that I don't think it's enough. we're in 2023, and as you said, this conversation has been going on for decades. But it's good, it's progress, right?
Yes, it's progress. It's progress. So then we looked at the second indicator, which was in terms of women in national parliaments, for instance. Only 26.5% of parliamentarians are women. And this is up from 11% in 1995. So 1995 is a while back, actually.
Yeah, and that doesn't feel like a big jump, does it really?
Yes. So I think, again, this indicator is a good one to see that things are progressing like really slowly.
Yeah.
And we were talking with Rekha and I when we were preparing for today, and we were saying about how in the corporate world, the gap is definitely getting better.
Yeah.
I mean, since I have been working in the corporate world, when I started in 2001, we were talking about diversity already, and we were looking at diversity, but it's definitely slow. It's a slow progress. And then, for instance, so I do remember a lot of things from my corporate life, where I have worked as a HR in investment banking, and that's very topical for today. A lot of women really used to leave. So I was working in graduate recruitment. We were doing a huge effort to really try to get in as many women as possible, not from a positive discrimination perspective, but just really encourage them to apply. And they were performing really well in assessment. They were joining, but then we knew that actually women really used to live around sort of mid-manager level. And we knew that the determining factor was that they were having a second child.
Oh, the second child, so not the first child.
Not the first child, because obviously what in Europe is very normal that mom and dad will obviously sort of be more in a partnering situation, and with one child and two adults, one of you can always take the child to the nursery, but there was definitely this combination when a second child was in the picture, and
Right.
especially when one or two of the children were reaching school age, because for instance in a place like UK, children leave school at 3:30, and
Yeah.
you haven't really finished work at 3:30. So it's like, what do you do, right?
Yeah, I think that, and actually, I do think the pandemic helped with that. I've had a lot of people who've said that during the pandemic, they actually got to do the school run, take their kids to school and pick them up, which they weren't, and then go back and continue working. So I think that's one bit positive. People found a different way
Yes.
to work. And I think one of the things that Angie, you and I were talking about is, I think there's two things here, isn't there? Because one is policy and legislation, because I know a lot of organizations now are providing, parental leave. So it's not just maternity leave, it's for both parents. And then the other one is also then around mindsets and behavior as well,
Yes. Yes.
which I think is kind of, how do we kind of challenge ourselves with it?
Yes.
And
I think the legislation has really advanced. And again, if you compare different continents, this is very different though.
Yeah.
Europe is very much ahead. Even in Europe, sort of Northern Europe and then the more south you go, has also been a bit different historically, but getting more uniform, basically. The US is very different. Still
They
today,
still
let's
don't
be
give
honest.
a lot of maternity leave. I mean, I don't know what it is right now, but I remember it being 10 weeks or something. Like,
Yeah, I mean the US are still in the kind of the 3 months, and we have lived in Kenya as well. We know it's 3 months.
Yeah.
3 months, actually, as some women are saying, from a physical perspective, if you have had C-section after your birth, you're still just barely recovering from the
Yeah,
actual C-section
not
before you
long at
need to
all.
go back to work. it's
Yeah.
it's tricky. But anyway, so legislation has advanced, definitely. But I agree with you, Rekha. There's also a thing about mindset, and when we were talking about mindset and the behaviors that the mindset sort of drives, let's say, we were comparing notes about how we have grown up in very different environments, right?
Yeah. Yeah, because I think it's interesting because obviously legislation, policies, I think that they're wonderful, really important. However, you may not be able to change that, or you can try and change it, of course. But one of the things I think is really important that you and I were talking about is mindset and beliefs. Like, are
Mm,
we, what stories are we talking with ourselves in terms of gender roles? And yeah,
mm,
you and I were talking about, like, I grew up in Indian family, first generation immigrants in England, in London, and you grew up in Spain,
yes,
and just the role of women and the expectation of women. So we had very different experiences. And
yes,
so that was really interesting to share. I mean, I can share mine if
yes,
first.
yes, yes, absolutely, go on.
Yeah. So my parents moved to London from Kenya in the 60s. My mum actually got married at the age of 17. Um, had an arranged marriage, didn't know my dad, meet him. And then, yeah, they got married. They had my sister, who is 6 years older. Then there was me, and then my brother. And I grew up in a family where it was very kind of patriarchal. When we had family over for dinner, if we had guests, the men would eat first.
Mm,
um, the women would
mm,
serve them, so the women
yes,
busy in the kitchen making the food, serving the men. Then the children would eat next, um, and they would be fed, and then it would be the women at the end, and my mum had very little help in the kitchen. And we lived, I mean, I grew up in a joint family, so we had like 9 of us in a
wow.
house.
And there's a
Yeah.
high expectation with Indian food, definitely.
Exactly, right? So you're having to make, your curries, your dal,
Yes,
which is like
that's a lot of
lentils.
time.
Yeah, and then the chapatis, and you're feeding 9 people, right? So my mom and my aunt were busy. And then it was really interesting as well. Like, so in my family, we had myself, my sister, and my cousin, who were the girls, and
Mm,
2 boys. As the
yes.
girls, we were taught how to make chapatis. We were the one who were given the chores to clean, uh,
Of
and
course.
all of that stuff. And so it was really just a very kind of, okay, this is women's, the woman has to do this and the man does this. And it was just very different to your experience. And
Yes.
silly things. I think, Angie, I was telling you that, my sister never learned to ride a bike because they weren't allowed. Girls
Yes,
were not.
exactly. You were telling me that, and I was like, "What?
I
How is
know.
that
It was like,
possible?"
I know, but it was really interesting because that was my world. That was
But she
what.
didn't. She didn't learn to ride a bike. To be clear, because she was a girl. Because
Yeah.
is that what you
No, it was
said,
because she
right?
was a
That the
girl. It
girls
was
are
because,
not.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah, girls are not allowed to ride a bike because apparently in those days they believed that it broke your virginity.
Oh my goodness. So, so yes, my case. So in when I have conversations about people in Spain, people have a diversity of opinions because people still think that Spain was still a very patriarchal society. But my experience personally, I don't think I see that. I think that women in Spain, like and those Mediterranean women, it's quite topical but quite true, that women are quite strong in in the
Right.
south of Europe, Mediterranean side of things. And although it was a bit kind of patriarchal to show to the world, a lot of decisions really have happened, like be inside the house, have happened and have had a lot of women input, definitely. And I feel that it was a lot more matriarchal than people was kind of openly admitting. But in any case, my experience was also a little bit different because my mom didn't have the chance to study. She wanted to, so after sort of the compulsory schooling, she wanted to continue, but she just didn't have the chance, literally because she was a girl.
Mm,
Because back in the days, you would not necessarily invest in girls' education. And she always felt that was a handicap for her. So when she had me, I'm the firstborn. It's me and then brother. My mom made it very much like her life mission, as I say, to make sure that I would have any opportunity that I wanted. If I wanted to study, well, or even more, I should study. And I'm definitely like the first girl in my family to have received a university degree. So
Mhm.
yes, so sometimes we forget this, right? Sometimes we forget that it has taken some
Yeah,
generational change and some time to actually
yeah,
get to this place. It's not been so long that women have been studying, that
yeah,
women have been in the workforce. So yes, a little bit of patience, but I think that these examples are demonstrating for me, Reka, that definitely there is set mindset in our past, in our ancestors, even today. In some countries, people still don't invest in women's education, to give an example, etc. It's
yeah.
still there,
It's
basically.
still there. But it's interesting. So when you were telling me the story, your story, I mean, even ours to an extent, like me and my sister, we both went to university. Um, but what it made me think about was breaking the cycle and the pattern. And
Yes,
your mum did that for you. And as you were talking, I was getting quite goosebumpy because I just find it so lovely that
yes.
she was doing that for you, and I think that's
Yes, she
amazing.
was very, very determined. So,
Yeah,
yes, I agree with you. And I think sometimes that's what it needs, determination to break the cycle,
yeah.
and to go like, yes, like from here is going to be different.
Different.
Yes.
Oh, I love that. From here it's going
Mm.
to be different. And I think so. The couple of things that you and I were talking about that have an impact on this is, representation, which we've just talked about, like our families, generational stories that we're hearing. I don't have a story in my ancestors where there was a woman who worked really hard and who did this, and um,
Mm.
so what are we hearing and listening growing up? I think that's really important to think about. And I was telling you earlier that my grandmother had 11 children.
Yes, I was like,
11.
what?
Yeah. And so she didn't really have a chance to do anything else. I'm not saying that that there was anything less in terms of doing that, but that was
Mm.
that generation,
Yes.
and that
Hmm.
was the expectation as well. But I think that what we're seeing now, what I'm seeing and hearing, is different stories.
Mm.
And I know my daughter, I have a daughter and a son, and I think both of them are hearing different stories. They're hearing stories about women. And I recently watched A Woman King, which I've been telling you to watch, Angie.
Yes,
And I honestly, I was like, this is an amazing movie
you loved
because
it. Yes,
I loved
I must
it.
watch it. Absolutely.
Yeah, because the way it represented women, these women that were strong and fearless and powerful, right? In a lot of, like growing up in a lot of movies and a lot of books, you don't really see that. So
Mm.
I think that having this representation that we're seeing now a lot more of is
Yes.
amazing. It's amazing. It's amazing for our children. It's amazing for me. And I think there's a difference then in how we parent as well.
Yes.
Um,
And I
how
was
I,
going to say, I'm just kind of interrupting you there, but I was also
yeah,
going to say, like sometimes when I talk to people about this, like for instance, this example of women and sort of powerful sort of women in literature and in stories, etc. And sometimes, like, people will bring up, oh, but like certain books or in the past, people like, yes, we talk about men, but we talk about men because that's how the society was constructed.
yeah,
So the representation in the last, what, like whatever, 5,000 years has been men, really. But we still have lots of powerful role models of women, but they have sort of been a little bit sidelined, or they have been
yeah,
often the supporting characters
yeah,
in a lot of stories. So
yeah,
what you're saying is Woman King is now this now powerful main character,
yes,
and we are going more into that, into more
yeah.
women being the main characters finally. Yes.
Well, the thing is, what's interesting is with Woman King, I was listening to another podcast, which is done from somebody I know, an amazing woman in Kenya. I'm just going to get the name of that podcast.
Yes.
It's called Afri Wetu.
Okay.
And she talks a lot about, African culture and history.
Mm,
And one of the
mm,
things she talks about the Dahomey Kingdom, which is what the Woman King is based on. And so in that day and age, in that time, there were these elite women warriors. But
mm,
the thing is, there were not many stories being told about it. Well, I didn't
yes.
hear it for sure. So I
Yes.
just think it's also like, you know, what stories are we hearing? Who is the main character? I remember there's a story in the Hindu culture, there's a story of Ramayan, which is
Mm,
about, it's a long story, I'm not going to go into it, but I took my daughter to see this play, and there's three main characters, which is Ram, Lakshman, and Sita. So
mm,
Sita is the female, and she's married to Ram.
mm,
And there's a scene in there where she's invited to pick up this big bow, which is really heavy.
mm.
Um, and my daughter at the end, she said, "Mum, I thought Sita was really powerful, but she
Uh-huh.
didn't, and strong, but she didn't pick up the bow. Why not?" And I was like, "That's a really good question." And this is my daughter,
Mm,
young. And I
mm.
think it's because when you think about it, it's because she didn't think she could, which goes back to mindset.
Yes, totally. Yes. Like,
Yeah,
what do you think you can or cannot do
can't
is what
do.
you then do, basically. Yes.
Exactly, exactly. So
Mm,
I think the key point here is how do we individually
mm.
shift our own, question ourselves, shift our
Yes.
own mindset, but
Yes.
also challenge others to do the same.
Yes.
You
Yes.
know,
Because of course the things like cultural norms are there and we cannot avoid it or we cannot deny it, basically,
we can
right?
change them though, right?
Yes, but obviously we can only change them when they come to our awareness, really, right? When
Well,
when we realize that there is a belief there.
Well, also, like I think about, like, say in my culture, Hindu
Mm,
culture, like
mm,
we do, there's like these fasts that you do, and it's usually the women fast. There's this one fast that I grew up doing where it's the women fast to find a
yes,
good husband. It's like, and
yes.
then and then it's like, okay, and again, my daughter will be like, "Oh, why don't the men fast to find a good woman?" It's
Yes,
like
and those are very valid questions,
very
right?
valid
Those are very
question.
valid questions.
But the thing
Yes,
is,
I mean when I have been in Kenya, like I have heard definitely like the whole kind of conversation around women should be submitted to men,
oh
which to me
really?
coming from again a European perspective, I was and Spanish and my own personal perspective, because again we all have layers, right? I was a bit like, oh, okay, but define submission, and they
Yeah.
are like, yes, yes, submission, submission. I was like, oh, okay. So
Submission, like just what do you mean? Like they have to submit, or what does
yes,
that
like
mean?
you like everything. So for instance, they will say, oh, women need to be submitted to men, and that's what the Bible is saying. So when you marry a man, the Bible is saying that you should submit to them, meaning that they take the decisions, they take the lead, they are the head of the family. You need to just do whatever the man is saying. And I was also saying, by the way, my personal opinion, of course, that means that a man needs to be engaged all the time, and that's also a huge expectation for men, to have to be all the time like providing, leading. I don't know what studies, I mean, obviously we go to those cultural norms and what kind of different cultures believe about what a partnership or a marriage is, or how two people should be together. Of course, we don't have time to get into so much of
We
that
don't.
now, and we are not
No.
here to analyze that. But yes, I also think that, I mean, for me, it's important also to allow men to have rest time, to have balance time, to have time with children. Why not? I think we were looking at that as well, and a lot of research is coming up that men want to do those things as well.
Yeah,
They want to spend time with their children, with their families. Yeah.
yeah, completely. I mean, I just think that we assume that we don't actually even ask the question sometimes to the men in a relationship, like, do you want to take time off to look after the
Mm.
children? I didn't ask my husband that. He took his paternity leave, but that was about it, which was 2 weeks.
Yes.
We
At
didn't
the
even we
time,
didn't even
yes.
question that, to be honest. And one of the things, Andrew, you were saying that when you were working in banking, you found that a lot more men put themselves forward for recruitment, for opportunities through recruitment or promotion. What was your experience around that?
So that was like also super interesting because so at the beginning I've worked in graduate recruitment, and then I've worked in experience recruitment and also as a HR generalist. And we knew this, we knew perfectly that when it comes to recruitment, and we've been talking about this for a while, men look at a job description, okay? So again, it's a whole mindset thing. Men look at the job description, and the job description says, okay, you need to have X years of experience. Used to say at the time, now it doesn't say, but you need to have X experience. You need to have this type of previous experience. You need to have this skill, this other skill, etc. And men would go like, okay, I have that, I have that. I don't have that, but I can
It's okay.
easily learn it or something. It's going to be fine because I've done something similar in doing
Yeah.
this. So men were also thinking a lot more about how their skills can be transferable, for instance. But I think it's also a confidence thing. With women, they would look at that job description and they would go like, oh, okay, I have that. I have that. I don't have that. I don't
Right.
have that. I don't have that. And they never really used to think in the same way. So sometimes as we were doing and it's so nice that obviously companies have thought a lot more about talent and development, and we have nowadays a lot more conversations around talent and
Mm,
development. So we would make sure that women that we saw that are doing really well, their managers were speaking to them about, okay, so what's next?
mm.
Why don't you put yourself forward for the
That,
next step,
yeah, yeah,
because if you were somehow not kind of encouraging them sometimes a little bit, they would not do it. So very
yeah.
different.
That goes back to what you were talking about earlier in terms of equity, isn't it?
Yes.
Like,
Yes.
that's a good example. Yeah, I think that I mean, I think all these things are really important. I'm just gonna kind of focus on what are the key things we were talking about is like representation. What are we
Yes.
seeing? What stories are we telling? Cultural norms. How do we challenge them? Because I know growing up I didn't challenge them, and when I hear my kids challenge them, I really like it.
Yes.
My son is like super comfortable putting on nail varnish, and I remember my husband's, he was like, initial reaction was like, oh, but then we were like, oh, that's cool, that looks really cool, and so, but we didn't grow up with that, right? So it was kind of,
Yes.
how are we questioning our own mindsets and biases, and thinking of, actually, you know what, it can be done differently. This is what I saw, but now I can change it.
Mm,
And just, how do we, yeah, challenge, shift our mindsets, and put ourselves forward? I think that's really important.
yes. Yes. And you were talking also about confidence and how men and women are a little bit different in
Yeah,
coaching, for
yeah,
instance.
yeah. I mean, again, it think links back to what you were saying, in terms of what I find. This is my own experience. Is when
Mm,
with a lot of female clients, they will externalize their successes and
mm,
internalize their failures. So when things
yes.
went wrong, it was always like, oh my God, it's my fault. I'm, da da da. Um, and then when things went right, it wasn't them, it was someone else who did it, or it was my team. So, but I mean, I am generalizing it, but this is just the kind of experience that I've had. Whereas men tend to it tends to be like, oh yeah, I did this, and that went really well. And then when things go wrong, it's someone else's fault. And that is not all men. I'm not saying that, but that's what a lot of the time when I'm working with different genders, that's what I've experienced.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. I mean, for me, for coaching, I have coached so many women, and they really had lots, especially in their 30s, when they are really growing career wise. They had lots of issues with balance, basically,
Yeah.
and how to be able to sort of balance everything. Sometimes if they are too strong, they are seen as aggressive, like, so all these very, very typical issues, basically, right? Like, where if they take more of a kind of what people consider male qualities, then they are not liked, basically. If they are too feminine qualities, then they are too women, like, and of course, again, it depends on where you work as well, right? I mean, again, when I've been in investment banking, it was a very male dominated environment. By the way, I never felt any bad or anything about it. I have said to lots of my coaching clients, because they ask, oh, you worked in investment banking, so were you like the only woman? And I was like, yeah, I was the only woman in the room many times.
Mm.
And when they ask me, how did you feel about that? I'm like, I didn't feel anything at all.
I think the thing, Angie, you and I were talking about is, if we move away from men, women, and we just talk about masculine and feminine energy, which we
Yes.
all have, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
one of the things that we've talked about is you have quite masculine energy, and
Yes.
actually, I do as well. But
Yes.
and so I mean, but the key thing is that we have both.
Yes.
Um,
Yes, exactly. So I like the concept of, for instance, to look at it as yin and yang, right?
yeah,
Because then you can see that you have both. You have yang energy, yin energies, and qualities. And yeah, sometimes some of us have more of one than the other. But like in that drawing, right, of yin and yang, we have both,
yeah,
basically. We have different energies, we have different qualities. And I think that sometimes we find it hard to embrace both, basically, to see ourselves as both, basically. So and we were talking about how if we just spoke about things sometimes more from just a human experience, and as human beings, more than men or woman, etc., a lot of these kind of folk would really disperse, right? And it would be seen very different, actually.
yeah. So I think it's how do we embrace both energies in ourselves, but also
Mhm.
look for them in others as well,
Yes.
and
Well,
notice our biases and judgments, and
exactly, I was
work.
going to say.
Yeah, and just how do we work on keeping an open mind, with it doesn't matter if it's male, female, it's human being.
Yes.
Um,
I
yeah,
think it's super important to realize that, of course, you come to a place with your bias. So,
yes,
of course, the same way I was commenting, like when people in Kenya have said something, of course, I do realize that I have a different opinion because I come from a different place.
space. Yeah,
Yes. So, again, in the workplace, we should also realize that we come to the workplace with different bias. We have all been raised in different cultural norms. We have different expectations. So realizing about this bias and sort of reflecting about it, I think, is a great first step
yeah.
to actually work on this. Yes. So yeah. So did we get to a place where we can say what is holding women back? Really?
I think it's not just women. I think it's what is holding us all back.
Yes.
Because in order to create a shift, we all need to work together, regardless of whether we're a man, woman, or whatever we may be or identify with. So I think it's kind of how do we have balance of both energies, masculine and feminine, embrace that, challenge our mindsets. So we've talked about today is there is inequality, there still is. But how do we shift our mindsets? How do we think about what stories are we sharing? What is our own narrative? And how does that impact what we do? And how do we create more of a balance? Yeah.
Yes.
So, yeah, I mean, that brings us to the end of the episode. I hope you enjoyed our conversation. We hope you found this useful. And, you know, to our listeners and to us, Angie, is to know that we are perfectly human, just the way we are. And remember to like and share and subscribe if you enjoyed this episode. And we look forward to seeing you next time.
See you next time.
See you.
Bye.
Bye.